You know, Jesse, this is a homestead, and one thing that you find around homesteading is it can be romanticized. Now, you don't do this full time.
Right.
I mean, but it's on full time. The animals are always here, and you always got something to do. How much of this is hobby? How much of this is lifestyle?
I mean, to me, I think it's more lifestyle than hobby. Farming's just in my blood. I enjoy it, and um, I've got a sign in the house that says farming is a lifestyle, or not a job, it's a lifestyle, and there's a lot of truth to that. That's one thing that's holding us back from getting different types of animals, because we couldn't take the vacations. I've got things set up now where we can at least go away for a weekend or something like that without too much negative for the animals. So,
Do you feel like you could take a day off fairly easily without stressing or without having to do an insane amount of prep work to take that day off?
right now, with the number of birds we have on site, yeah, there's definitely, with the automatic waters and the way the rollout nesting boxes are, we can take a day off without too much concern. You go much longer than a day or two, then yeah, you've got to do some prep work. You got to get a neighbor to come over or something like that. So it's a little bit of stress there.
Yeah, one of the things I don't think people think about when they think about that romanticized lifestyle is that day in, day out, your back hurts, you got to do it. It's cold out, you got to do it. You want to take the day off or 5 days off. You can't always do that depending on when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, today it's late October, it's 70 degrees out and beautiful. It's not hard to want to come outside. Come January, when it's 0 out and I'm chipping something went wrong and the water froze up, and you're chipping it out and you're freezing, it's not so much fun. So there's definitely days where I'll sit inside and be like, man, why am I doing this type of thing? But
you got to take the good with the bad.
Exactly.
Jesse, right here, we're in front of your transport crates, and recently you've made the decision to go from processing here on your homestead to taking them to a processor that's relatively close.
Yep.
Why?
The main reason was time. So the first batch of chickens this year, about 4 days before processing date came around, I threw my back out, and I literally couldn't even walk, let alone process chickens. So I had to keep the birds around for an extra week, which I ended up losing quite a few because they just were too big and lethargic, and they were dropping of heart attacks at that point. So, and then it's stressful. I get they're just a chicken, but you're still taking a life, and to process 20, 25 of them, by the end of the day, you're pretty well drained physically and mentally.
Was that you just doing 20 to 25 yourself?
That was just me. So
that's a full day.
It's a full day. I'd get up, start at 7 in the morning, and basically by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was finally done. And then the next day, I just had them packed in ice. So the next day, you then got to cut them up and actually package them. So it was a lot of work. And if I was taking into account my time, there's no way it was profitable. So I made the decision to go with the local processor. Plus, then they're USDA inspected, so I can sell them anywhere with that inspection.
Right. And one thing, if you're going to a processor, this always comes up, is you're going to have to invest in a transport crate itself. And these aren't cheap, but the nice thing is they last forever. So going to a processor isn't just a decision you make, you're also going to have some financial inputs into this. In these crates, they say they can hold up to 10. You found 6 to 8 can work.
Yeah, I was really concerned. If I would have packed them in, I could have definitely got 10 in there, but it was a warm day. The birds are already seeming to get stressed because they're just so big and lethargic at that point. I only went with, basically, I had the extra crates, so I just made the decision we'll put in 6 to 8 of them per crate. And I did end up losing one bird. I put them in the night before. The next morning when I came out, there was one bird that had died in there, but otherwise they all survived. There wasn't great loss or anything.
So knowing 6 to 8, let's call it even 10, you could fit in here. If you're doing a batch of 50, you got to buy at least 5 crates, and they're $50, $60 a piece. That's $300 that you're going to have to put into this. you can wash them down, they'll last a long time. But one thing that definitely you got to think about if you're going to go process off farm. One thing I've thought of from talking to a lot of people who process on farm versus off is the trade-offs of you're not doing it yourself. There's some added stress. Like when you do put the birds in here, they're getting stressed. You're taking them somewhere else. How does that align with you, and how do you feel about that?
It was definitely a concern. When I'm processing them here, I can kind of calm a bird down before I do anything. I know what's being done to them to do the processing and take their life. So I was concerned. So I actually talked to the processor before I decided to go with them, and I had a couple friends who had used them. So it's a family-run business locally here. They're very concerned about ethical treatment of the animals and everything. So I think in their end it was a good decision. It aligns with my values, but there was definitely concern about that.
Yeah, it's all part of the trade-offs of doing this business, whether it's a four-legged type or a two-legged type. There's going to be that one bad day that comes, and you're either going to be the one that does it, which has its own trade-offs and consequences, or you got to take it somewhere else and really pass that burden on to somebody else, which has its own trade-offs. And I think a lot of these businesses do try their best. Because they have actual people working there that have to do this day in and day out. So they're trying to make the experience good for the people. And then in terms of the animals themselves, I think a lot of times that translates. And these are relatively small-scale processors that people like yourself deal with. So this isn't some massive 500 birds a minute USDA slaughterhouse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know how many they process through a day, but it's definitely smaller scale. I mean, they're using the kill cones just like we're using here. It's almost like a scaled up version of what I was doing. And the birds were a little stressed when I loaded them up. I did it at night, so they're kind of in their half sleeping mode or whatever. But other than that, they weren't too concerned. I actually had them inside the vehicle to transport them, so they weren't getting all the road wind and everything on them. They just kind of went for a ride that day. They didn't seem stressed out or anything like that. So overall, I think it was a fairly good experience.
For somebody who wants to process on farm, knowing the infrastructure that you have, knowing the equipment you had to buy, what number do you think that makes sense to buy versus rent?
I guess renting, I don't know of any place around here where I could have rented, so it wasn't really an option. But I started out with just doing hand plucking and using just a pot of water for a scalder, and I did maybe 10 to 12 birds, and that was a lot. So I knew right then and there if I was going to do anything more than maybe 10 or 12, I needed at least a plucker. That's probably the key piece of infrastructure that I see that really makes a difference in how fast you can process. So once I started scaling up to doing 30 or so birds, I made the investment in a plucker.
Now, if somebody wanted to process on farm, they're doing, let's say, a batch of 20 birds at a time, what would you advise them to think about before they made that decision? If they had also a convenient option and a quality option off farm that they could take them to?
I mean, I think first and foremost, they have to think of, can they actually take the life of the animals? I know it's just a chicken, but there's still that aspect of it, so you need to be able to do that. Beyond that, I think they just need to, it's tough work. I mean, anyone who's ever plucked a chicken and gone through it, it's a lot of work. So I think they need to be very open and upfront with themselves and make sure that you're in for like a 10-hour day of literally gutting, being in it up to your arms. It's not an easy task. So
it's going to take a lot longer than you think.
It could take a lot longer than you think. I mean, if you can sucker some friends into helping out and giving them some free chicken, it'll definitely help the process out. That was one of my bigger issues, is it was just myself. So I would, do the killing, do the scolding, do the plucking, and keep moving on. And I couldn't find a good way to be real efficient and keep things, because you've always got some sort of bottleneck somewhere. You can only do so much at a time. So it was a long day.
I bet. We're now in front of your pastured poultry pens. They're a Siskovich style pen, but continuing on with the processing theme, well, one thing that does play into this is economics. If you process on farm, I think a lot of people think, well, that's free.
Yep.
The equipment you do have to buy, and that's a one-time thing, but you also have your time in there, and your time isn't valued at zero, even though most people assume that. If you take them off farm, you mentioned that it would be $4 a bird, and all you're doing is drop them off, pick them up, and they're done.
Yep.
Having processed on farm, when you look at those economics, what do you think about them?
Yeah, so that was one of the major factors. The first time we processed, or the first few times I processed, was I didn't really justify in my mind spending the $4 per bird to have it processed. I was thinking I can do it myself. It's free. Well, as you mentioned, time isn't free, and when you're spending 10 hours processing, there's definitely cost to that. So now we're pricing in the processing fee right into our cost of our birds. We're factoring that in. So I wouldn't, anytime you're doing a larger scale, there's no way I would do it on farm. I mean, processing off farm is, in my mind, the only way to go. It's just so much less stressful. The product, I think, these guys do it every single day. It comes back and it's nicely vacuum sealed. It has a professional label on it. It has your label on it. The weight's on there. You can have them custom print things if you want, and then it's USDA inspected. So to me, it's a win-win.
When you think about the economics of this, you're selling poultry $5 a pound. What do your birds weigh out at finish? Like 4.5, 5, somewhere in there?
Yeah, so this time it was, we had them for 42 days is all. So they were just over 7 weeks. And the smallest one I think was 4 pounds, and the largest one was about 6.25 process. So they were good sized bird, and we found that most of our customers want something around 4.5 pounds, maybe 5. So you start getting into the bigger birds, and that's where we've been parting them out, because that's a big bird to eat.
It's a lot, yeah. So, at a 5-pound bird, you're $25 retail on that. You're probably, $12, $13 into it with
somewhere
that $4 processing fee?
Yeah, that's right around where we're at. So we're still making a decent profit on them.
Now, the chicken tractors behind me, you have 2 of them. They're the John Siskovich style. They're the hoop style. You've liked these. They've worked really well for you. Of the features on them, what are some of your favorite things that you really like about these?
Probably the best feature is I'm 5'7", I can walk in there just barely bending over. So it's not like the Salatin style where they're very short and you've got to reach way back in. So they're good for that. As far as putting birds in and taking birds out, the door, he's made it so they basically fit the standard crates. So you can load all your birds right from the brooder, bring them up, put them at the door, get them out, and then when you're conversely at processing time, you just put the crate right there, gather them up and put them right in. So you don't lose birds or not scurrying away, so that works really well. They're relatively light. I can move them without much problems. Even when I had hurt my back, I was still able to move them pretty easily. So that's a definite advantage. The other thing I found is there's good cross ventilation. I end up going with a slightly smaller tarp than what I think John has in the plans. The initial tarps were going down to the ground, which is good from if the sun's coming in, it helps protect the birds, but I found that it was kind of almost making like a greenhouse, and there wasn't enough ventilation in there. So I went with a slightly smaller tarp, and that's really helped with the cross ventilation.
For predator protection, when it comes to a chicken tractor, I think some people think the chicken tractor itself is enough, but you've taken some additional measures to help protect the birds, running a poly wire, or actually a couple poly wires around the outside. Can you explain what you're doing there?
Yeah, so the chicken tractor itself is definitely not protection enough, at least in my experience. Maybe if you had perfectly flat ground, it wouldn't be a problem, but anytime you have a slight dip or whatnot, I actually had where the raccoons would come in, reach under, because the birds for some reason tend to sleep around the perimeter. So the raccoons would come in at night and literally pull a chicken right out from under the tractor. So what I've done is I just set up 3 posts along each side. The first one is about 4 inches off the ground, 3 inches off the ground, and then I have about another 6 inches up. I put a second poly wire, and I just string that around, and it's powered off a solar charger, and that zero problem since I've done that. You know, if anything's coming, if it's going to crawl under, it's going to get hit. If it tries to go over, it's going to get hit. And at 8,000 volts, that tends to dissuade them pretty quickly.
This is one operation you don't actually have in play right now. You're done with broilers for the year. Yep. Only having the 2 tractors, how many broilers are you doing per year in these 2 tractors? Over how many batches?
So this year I only did 2 batches. With our time frame, I could probably get 4 batches in if I wanted to throughout the growing season, and then I can do 30 birds per. So if demand, you know, was enough, we could definitely scale it up to 360 a year with just the 2 tractors.
And you got a lot of grass here. I mean, there's some trees, it's wooded around us, but there's a lot of grassy area, and just moving these, you said at some points you're moving them twice a day when they get bigger. But again, this is your yard, which is really cool to have. This isn't just some pasture way out there segregated from the house. The house is right behind you, and then your yard's out here, and you're moving the chicken tractors around that.
Yeah, it's worked great. They go in at about 3 weeks old, and probably from 3 weeks to, I'd say 5 weeks, once a day moving is fine. Depending on how many are in there and what losses I have. If I have the full 30 in there, from about 5.5, 6 weeks on, I want to move them twice a day because the manure starts to accumulate. But it's worked out great, and it's, you know, definitely building the soil. It's helped out the grass tremendously. My neighbors use the chemical fertilizer on their yard. My yard's greener than theirs is. So
there you have it, Jesse Thiessen of the Old Orchard Homestead. If you want to learn more about Jesse, be sure to check out his website. The link to that is below. If you want to learn how to build chicken tractors like this, they're the John Siskovich style. John's out of Camps Road Farm in Connecticut. You can get a link to his book that has plans for all of these below. John's doing some great things. I want to thank Jesse for taking some time out of his Sunday to show me around today. It's been great touring. I hope you got a lot out of this one. I hope it gave you a look at what practical homesteading is really like. It's a blend of lifestyle and business and trying to match it up in a way that works for you. For Jesse, he's somebody who works full-time, so this is a side thing. It's not just about the money. It's very much about the lifestyle, the heritage, blending it together with your kids. There's one piece of advice that I can suggest to anybody out there looking to do this. Think about why you want to do it, and then create some sort of model that fits that why. Everything has to work together. What you're doing during the week, what you're doing on your fun time, what you want to do, what the rest of your family wants to do. You got to try and find something there that's a cohesive model. If some of those things are at odds, odds are none of it will stick, and a lot of it will probably end up blowing up. I've seen it a lot with people who get into this space. So think about finding something that works, and that means having trade-offs. That's all for this one. Coming to you from South Lyon, Michigan. Thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.